This is Paul, the Apostle Paul, saying this. I must go on boasting. Although there's nothing to be gained, I will go on to visions and revelations from the Lord. I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. Whether it was in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And I know that this man, whether in the body or apart from the body, I do not know, but God knows, was caught up to paradise and heard inexpressible things, things that no one is permitted to tell. I will boast about a man like that, but I will not boast about myself, except about my weakness. Even if I should choose to boast, I would not be a fool, because I would be speaking the truth. But I refrain, so no one will think more of me than is warranted by what I say or do, or because of these surpassingly great revelations. Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan, to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. I wonder how many of us have said that over the last year or so. When I am weak, then I am strong. I will delight in all these things, because in my weakness, it is then I am strong. Title for this morning, where do we go from here? Where do we go? Where do you go from here? Where do we go from here? Can I give you a little bit of background? Some of you will know some of this. It might be new to some. This letter was written in the early days of the church by somebody called Paul, who had started off persecuting the Christians when he was called Saul. He had an encounter with the risen Jesus Christ, and this transformed him totally, and he became one of the biggest supporters, the evangelist, the missionary, who went around what we now know as Europe, spreading the good news about Jesus Christ, the Son of God who had died and rose again, that we may all live life to the full now and forever. Now, Paul, on one of these journeys, had gone to, again, the place we now know as Greece, to a town, a city called Corinth. This was a very wealthy city. It was also a Roman colony. Think of the power and the might of Rome. It was very wealthy because of all the trade, all the ships that were going there. So this city was into money, power, being flash, being strong, and looking good. Just like the Romans. And the trouble was that the church was becoming like that as well. Trying to be flash, trying to be strong, trying to be clever, trying to impress, clever speakers, that kind of thing. Promising things that they couldn't. We will heal you. We will do miracles. The church was becoming like this. And it was mainly becoming like that because what Paul called the super apostles, these rather flash apostles, were going round and preaching the wrong gospel. And what they were saying about Paul was, he's not very impressive. Maybe Paul was quite small. He hadn't had the teaching of how to speak, how to be an orator. Maybe it suggested he had a stutter, some kind of impediment. Maybe he was suffering from an obvious illness, but he was not impressive in their eyes. And also, what about this thorn in his flesh? If it happened to be an illness, none of us know, if it happened to be an illness, well, Paul, if you're an apostle, why aren't you healing yourself in the way we are healing everybody? And people were getting swayed by this. This is what the power of God looks like. Woo! And he hasn't got it. We have. You should follow our kind of power. The trouble is, that kind of power was more like the power of Rome and the culture of Rome. Paul said, and he's taking the mickey here, his sense of humour is jumping out. I could play that game if I want to, but actually I'm not going to boast about these spiritual experiences. Yes, I've had them. He's talking about himself there 14 years ago. I am going to boast about my weaknesses, because actually it's God who moves in that way, not a worldly way, that is the God who I would like you to know better. And in the previous chapter he talks about being shipwrecked, being in the sea for a night and a day, being whipped, probably by the Jewish authorities, 5 times with 40 lashes minus 1, hit with a rod, probably by the Roman authorities, coming across bandits, being poor, being ill. He went through it all. I could boast about that. And there's this lovely thing he says, which isn't always obvious. But he says in the previous chapter, and at one stage, when I was in Damascus, the governor was after me to arrest me, and I had to escape through a window, out of the castle wall, the fortress wall, in a basket. And he tells them about that. Roman culture. The greatest reward you could get as a soldier in Rome was the Coranus Muralis. Now, this was the award. Imagine the mighty Roman army going through Europe, taking over. And then very inconveniently, sometimes people would bed in their fortress and not surrender, and they'd have to lay siege. So what the Roman commanders, generals wanted were for brave people to go over the wall, to get a ladder up. This is the crown of the wall, Corona Muralis. And the first person into the city probably wouldn't survive, but they would get this award. It's like the Victoria Cross, which is often given to people after they have been killed in battle. Imagine what Paul was saying. No, I didn't go over the wall like a Roman. I escaped in a basket through the wall and went the other way. I'm weak. Be weak like me, because in my weakness I have met Christ and I know the power of Christ. I have learned the grace of Christ more in my weakness than in supposed strength. Be honest, would you rather be strong in a worldly way? Do you mind being weak in the way that Jesus Christ was weak? You might say that Jesus died in weakness on the cross. You don't have to say that. Paul says that in 2 Corinthians. Jesus Christ died in weakness. God showed who he is most clearly through Christ. A Christ who didn't come in mighty strength in battle, but in humility and gentleness and surrender and other-centeredness, and not wanting to boost his image. For those of us who are called to follow Jesus, it's quite a tough calling, but it is hidden with blessings. Not the obvious blessings. Please listen and hear me out. How have you done over the last year or so? Again, have you become more loving of God, of other people, of yourself? Have you become more accepting of people who are different? Or have you become more self-seeking, more stubborn, more angry, more, this is about me and my survival? My guess is it's a mixture for all of us. But the question this morning is, where do we go from here? Where do you go from today? What about your faith? Have you been a mighty warrior for the Lord? Have you been on your knees in prayer all the time? Have you many miraculous stories you could tell people? Have you had these surpassing revelations from God? Maybe you have. Or are you more like Paul? Have you been through it? Have you been stretched to the limit? Have you come to the end of your tether? Can I encourage you this morning? It is in our weakness that we know the power of God. And can I suggest it's not necessarily, I'm not ruling it out, but it's not necessarily the power to heal, the power to do amazing things. But if you're anything like me, knowing the power of God is in the midst of the challenges and the struggles, getting out of bed each morning. On some days, the strength and the power of God to put one foot in front of the other. The strength and the power of God to actually keep that hope alive or get back in touch with it when it's dead. I think this is the encouragement from Paul this morning. It's not in the obvious. If you have lost your faith, if your faith has gone on ice, on hold, then be encouraged. Please hear these words from one of my favourite authors. And this is Brian McLaren, who was a pastor. And the spiritual truth is this, he says. There's a difference between knowledge on ice, he's talking about Christians here, and knowledge on fire. For many Christians, their belief is often just knowledge on ice. Not experiential first-hand knowledge, which is knowledge on fire. Even though we call them both faith, there is a difference between intellectual belief and real trust. There is a difference between talking and transformation of God's love, and then stepping out in confidence in living a loving life. Only the second type of faith is biblical, when our walk matches our talk. He claims, and I tend to agree, and I'm looking at myself sometimes, our beliefs, our faith is up there. We go to church, maybe. We kind of believe that when we die we're going to go to heaven. We do believe in the Bible, we believe in Jesus, but sometimes that has absolutely no impact on our daily life. We still get petrified by things, fearful, anxious. And God understands that. We still make decisions not based on that faith, but actually what's going to make me feel good. Or when I get to the end of my strength, I'm just going to rely on my logic. I would suggest this morning, it is when we get to the end of our tether, when we feel weak, that is the opportunity to know Christ better. It's very humbling, like Paul's thorn was humbling. It's very humbling. We don't learn humility by going to university and doing a degree in humility. We learn it by being humbled. And humbling is painful. That pain you have been through, no doubt, over the last year, it's humbling. But the good news is it can draw us closer to God. It can draw us further away. But whatever it has done for you, please hear these words again. God's grace and mercy are new every day. In some ways it doesn't matter. What matters is where do we go from here? Where do you go from today? I have a hunch about me, about all of you, about this church. My guess is not many of us would rate ourselves 10 out of 10 in whatever scale we come up with for the last year and a bit. My hunch is that if we choose today, and then tomorrow, and then the next day, to say, God, here I am in my weakness, in my not knowing everything, in my imperfection, but I choose to put one foot in front of the other, trusting that you're with me. That's the question. I'm just going to finish this by saying one other thing. Not for 1 minute do I believe God caused Paul to be shipwrecked, to be beaten, And God did not, in my opinion, give him this whacking thorn in the flesh. Paul uses this phrase, a messenger of Satan, to keep me humble. Not for 1 minute do I believe God has caused any of our heartache, losses and pain over the last year or so. That is not what God is like. We just need to look to the cross and the love and the humility and the surrender of Jesus to know what God is like. But rather, God has been with you whether you have looked to him or not, whether you have sensed him or not. It is God who has brought you through. And this is the same God who every day you wake up will be saying to you, whispering to you in your ear and not coercing you, walk with me. Come to me, all who are weak and heavily laden. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. Where do you go from here?